Monaco does not forgive. And this year, Ferrari arrives in the Principality with the weight of expectations and the clear limits of a single-seater that so far has only shone intermittently. In this video, we are going to discover everything that is behind the preparation of the prancing horse for one of the most complex races of the calendar. The technical choices aimed at the fast lap, the work on tire management, the return of Leclerc in the home Grand Prix, and the new mandatory double stop that could overturn everyone's strategy. But there's more. We will analyze the real weak points of the SF25, the updates that will come from here to Silverstone, the moves of the competition, and the signals coming from the garage. Mercedes, Red Bull, and McLaren, if you enjoy the videos, hit like to support me. Let's get started right away. Fred Vasseur continues to maintain a cautious but determined profile. Even in view of the Monaco Grand Prix, he did not indulge in proclamations or triumphant predictions. The team principal of Ferrari has instead preferred to focus on the work done to best prepare for a race that, given the characteristics of the track, does not seem ideal for the SF25. In Maranello, they focused on single-lap performance, knowing that qualifying is crucial in Monte Carlo. The single-seater struggles in slower, twistier sections, making overtaking extremely difficult during the race. And it is precisely on these areas that the team has tried to optimize the remaining potential of the car. The work of the technicians in recent weeks has been aimed at trying to extract something more on the fast lap on Saturday, which often has been the weak point in this first part of the season. It's not about revolutions, but fine-tuning that can make a difference on a track like Monaco. A regulatory novelty adds further complexity to the weekend. For the first time this season, it will be mandatory to make at least 2 pit stops in the race. This seemingly secondary detail will completely change the strategies, pushing the teams to make bolder or unpredictable choices. Vasseur has indicated that this facet has been thoroughly examined. Naturally, there is also an added emotional toll. For Charles Leclerc, this is the home race, the one he dreams of winning every year. And even if the track doesn't help, Ferrari will do everything possible to put him, and with him Lewis Hamilton, in a position to achieve the best possible result. Vasseur knows that he doesn't have the most complete car in the lot, but he is still trying to build something solid. Although the results haven't satisfied everyone yet, his approach remains clear and
consistent. Working
with what one has and bringing out the best, after all, is also what is asked of a leader in the most difficult times. All things considered, the feeling is that if Ferrari is being prepared that, if it can't win, still wants to show that it can fight intelligently. The work on qualification and strategy is focused on minimizing errors, especially in Monaco where mistakes are costly. This type of preparation can make the difference between an anonymous race and one where you're in the spotlight. Ferrari is going through a phase of deep technical transformation, and even if the results are not yet up to expectations, there is no shortage of work in Maranello. The SF25 is under continuous observation, and race after race, efforts are made to correct its most obvious weaknesses. One of the main criticisms remains the rigidity of the setup and the excessive ground clearance. Problems that were clearly evident in Imola and particularly compromise braking stability. However, in the upcoming appointments, a rather complex update package is planned, specifically designed to improve these areas. A new front wing will arrive in Spain, designed to pass more restrictive checks in terms of flexibility, while shortly after it will be the turn of a revised bottom. Perhaps the most important element, however, will be the new rear suspension expected by mid-June. The aim of this modification is to counteract the lifting of the rear end during braking, a condition that causes the SF25 to lose load precisely at the most delicate moments of driving. The situation is not simple, also because the limitations imposed by the budget cap prevent more radical structural interventions. For example, the carbon gearbox cannot be touched, and so the suspension mounts will have to be repositioned. Only where the transmission offers a minimum of sufficient structural rigidity. We're talking about minimal shifts on the order of 0.78740,157 inches just to achieve a functional compromise without overturning the project. In Imola, for example, we saw a rear wing recycled from the SF24 complete with beam.
wing and
A similar operation will also be replicated in the Principality, always with existing components and therefore without impact on the spending cap. But the real step forward is expected from Silverstone onwards. There, the entire updated package should arrive, which, according to Loic Serra's plans, should finally allow the Rossa to fight more stably in the upper part of the ranking. And there is also another technical issue that is being tried to solve: the management of the rear baskets, that is, those fundamental structures to control the temperature of the tires during traction. It's a key point because if the temperatures rise too much, the tire skids, overheats, and deteriorates quickly. It is probably in this thermal fragility that the origin of the difficulties encountered in qualifying at Imola should be sought. The SF25 seems too sensitive to changes in asphalt temperature, and setup modifications often aren't enough to adapt. Despite everything, the team does not give up. Leclerc and Hamilton know that patience will be needed because the technical turnaround will only come with time. Despite limitations, the work done so far suggests Ferrari is making a serious effort to recover. It's not about miracles or sudden revolutions, but a path made of targeted and courageous choices. Perhaps concrete actions matter more than promises. Monte Carlo, as we know, is a unique track, narrow, winding, with no room for errors. And for this very reason, the balance of the car becomes crucial. The drivers must fully trust the car to be able to approach the walls in qualifying. And at the moment, it seems that Ferrari is still struggling to find that operating window where everything works best. Imola was a clear example. In qualifying, the SF25 was completely out of phase, while on race pace it showed encouraging signs. This suggests that it's not the car itself that's wrong, but rather the way it's set up and managed, especially in terms of tires. Indeed, the thermal management of the tires is one of the most critical points at Imola and most likely also at Monaco. The rear of the car heats up much faster than the front. The result is a thermal symmetry that prevents having homogeneous grip and full confidence, especially in the first sectors of the lap. It's a problem already seen with the SF24 and never really solved. To make matters worse, the Monaco circuit is notoriously stingy with energy generated on the front axle, while at the back there is even a risk of overheating. A puzzle that some teams like McLaren are managing perfectly. Ferrari, on the other hand, continues to stumble over the same difficulties. A predictable behavior but difficult to correct that disrupts the entire weekend starting from Saturday. However, Monaco's nature allows for fewer technical compromises, offering a small glimmer of hope. This could help the SF25, which usually struggles to find a balance between the mechanical and aerodynamic aspects. Here, however, the balance is easier to achieve. Moreover, contrary to popular perception, the Italian car is not lacking in mechanical grip. The real problem is in the ability to generate vertical load, especially at the front, in slow cornering. And that lack of aerodynamic push complicates things a lot in the slower sections where the car slides without there being a real loss of mechanical grip. Unfortunately, the SF25 does not generate enough downforce compared to the competition at equal speeds. The onboard data shows quite clearly that the weakest point is right at the front. There is a lack of stability and support in direction changes and slow turns. And this is a heavy burden on a circuit like Monte Carlo. A small advantage, however, could come from the ground clearances. On tracks like the one in the Principality, the single-seaters run higher out of necessity. This detail fits well with the higher and stiffer setup of the Ferrari, which in Imola was visibly higher off the ground compared to the opponents. The advantage may not be huge, but it could help to reduce the gap from the best a bit. Ultimately, tire management will decide everything. If the team can really take advantage of that minimum mechanical grip it has, and if it can optimize the use of the tires in qualifying, then we might see Ferrari compete, at least with Mercedes. Otherwise, even in Monaco, the risk is that everything good remains hidden, just like what happened in Imola. The issue of ground clearance is central. The lower the car is, the more it can generate aerodynamic load from the bottom. It seems like a simple concept, but in reality it's tied to a very delicate balance between vertical forces, the work of the suspensions, and the overall response of the chassis. Ferrari, to avoid disqualifications related to excessive wear on the bottom, is forced to run at a higher height than ideal. This compromises the entire aerodynamic platform and particularly the performance in qualifying. During the dry lap, the SF25 struggles to find the correct position to work efficiently. The rear is too stiff. This was clearly seen at Imola, in passages over curbs like Tamburello or Villeneuve, where the single-seater would easily come apart. The suspension response is too harsh and prevents the car from absorbing the imperfections of the track, leading to oversteering and loss of control. It's as if the car never really manages to sit on the asphalt to generate that extra grip that new tires should offer. The paradox is that this setup, designed to prevent it from lifting too much in fast corners, instead penalizes in slow corners where the car can't lower enough to create load. It's a double disadvantage. The overly stiff suspension doesn't help mechanically,
and the
aerodynamics don't kick in because the right compression is missing. That virtuous cycle where more load brings more grip and therefore correct temperatures and performance is not triggered. Therefore, the SF25 in qualifying ends up running higher and stiffer than almost all the competitors. It doesn't copy the roughness, it doesn't find traction, it doesn't work the tires in the right window, and this is especially noticeable in the slow sections. The only area where it manages to defend itself is in the fast curves, where the rigid setup rewards stability. And you can try to compensate for the lack of load with superior aerodynamics, even sacrificing a bit of the overall balance. The situation changes in the race pace. Here the speeds are lower and the compression is less, which leads the suspensions to work in a more manageable range. In the race, the SF25 appears more consistent, predictable, and finally performing as anticipated. The aerodynamics developed in the wind tunnel begins to give positive signals. But the downside is that, to avoid risking wear on the bottom, the car is raised and this cancels out some of the benefits. The real issue is that the suspension geometries that were supposed to mitigate these effects seem inadequate. There is talk of internal updates to the suspensions, perhaps even changes to the triangles, which will be revealed in the coming weeks.
It's not just Ferrari that has to face these dilemmas.
Red Bull and McLaren also coexist with the same type of phenomenon, albeit in a different way. McLaren manages to soften the rear end without losing stability thanks to very effective aerodynamics. However, it has a very rigid front, so much so that Norris often complains about the difficulty of driving the car. Red Bull, on the other hand, has built a super rigid platform which works wonderfully for Verstappen but becomes unmanageable for other drivers less accustomed to such an extreme car. It's no coincidence that Tsunoda in Imola lost the car right on the exit of the curbs, victim of the brutal reactivity of the RB21. Mercedes has just introduced a new rear suspension, but the results have been disappointing so far. Antonelli and Russell have struggled to find balance, a sign that they too have not yet solved it.
the equation. After
the success at Imola, Verstappen arrives in Monaco with the clear goal of definitively re-entering the fight for the title. The updates brought by Red Bull in the Jeddah, Miami, Imola triptych have had their effect, solving some of the most evident problems of the RB21. But the next month will be played on very different circuits, slow, technical, and penalizing for those who have weak points on the rear axle. Canada, Austria, and especially the Principality represent a very different challenge, and in this context, McLaren could regain a significant advantage. The championship is shaping up towards a three-way battle, but Monte Carlo could confirm or overturn the hierarchies. McLaren comes with the car probably most suited to this type of track, strong on slow curves and equipped with an effective rear end in traction. As often happens here, Saturday will decide almost everything. On a track with limited overtaking opportunities, the qualifying results will significantly influence the final race standings. Despite the RB21's limitations, Verstappen kept pace in Miami, and Imola showcased an excellent race pace, managing to win even when the McLarens seemed faster on paper. The latest race data shows Red Bull has reduced the qualifying gap to under 0.2 seconds. The fundamental difference is that Max always manages to maximize what he has at his disposal. He's the only one of the three title contenders to have already won and secured pole position in Monaco. If there's a circuit where he can make a difference, it's this one. Ferrari needs a turnaround. The data shows that with the softer tires, the gap doubles compared to the 3/10 seen on harder compounds. Barring a miracle, recovering on Sunday will be tough, like in Jeddah or Imola. Saturday mistakes are punishing. The hope for Maranello is that the peculiarities of the track, higher setups, maximum load and extreme suspension management, can at least level the values a bit. But it's not all negative. Charles Leclerc can make a difference. He knows the streets of the Principality best. The Monegasque has always known how to push the car beyond its limits when racing at home, and if Ferrari were to surprise, it would almost certainly be thanks to an extraordinary performance by him. All the pressure is on him, but he has already proven in the past that he can handle it. On the other side of the box is Hamilton, who appeared closer to Leclerc. In Imola, he reduced the qualifying gap from 3/10 to just 1. It's not a track he particularly loves, but his experience and ability to adapt can weigh heavily, especially in such a technical context. And then there's a symbolic detail: Ferrari will race with a special livery to celebrate 75 years of partnership with Shell. A way to remember the past while laboriously trying to build a more solid present. In recent weeks, Red Bull has appeared increasingly curious and perhaps a bit suspicious about McLaren's performance. especially regarding the ability of the English car to keep the rear tire temperatures under control. After what was seen in Miami, where Piastri had shown an excellent level of tire management under difficult conditions, they began to investigate more thoroughly in Milton Keynes. Second, according to Red Bull technicians, such thermal behavior would be hardly achievable without the aid of some type of active cooling. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile has already carried out checks on McLaren after the Miami Grand Prix, finding everything in order, but Red Bull has not stopped. The team has submitted to the Federation a long list of questions bordering on the nitpicky to understand if some solutions could fall within the limits of the technical regulations. The intent, not even too veiled, is clearly to find, if not proof, at least a suspicion that explains how McLaren manages to contain overheating better than others. One of the most imaginative hypotheses put forward by the team concerns the use of the water reserve intended for the driver. According to Red Bull, it would theoretically be possible to divert part of this reserve to the rear axle to use it in cooling the tires or the braking system. It's a grey area of the regulations, since it doesn't explicitly prohibit the use of water for purposes other than hydrating the driver. Red Bull requested formal clarifications and the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile provided a clear response. Any technique that allows the use of water, even if initially intended for the driver for technical cooling purposes, falls within the definition of liquid brake cooling. It violates Article 11.5 of the regulations, firmly closing this possibility. Earlier, Red Bull had also asked whether the use of insulating materials in brake baskets or the use of technologies that could simulate passive cooling was allowed, but with effects similar to those of a liquid. None of these paths, however, seem to have found fertile ground in the current regulations. Verstappen, for his part, has kept a rather neutral profile, publicly acknowledging that McLaren has found something very clever and that it is right to recognize its merit. But the reality is that behind the scenes, Red Bull continues to dig, perhaps also because it begins to perceive that on certain types of track, McLaren has really become a concrete threat. This episode once again shows how much every detail counts in Formula One. And when a team seems to do something better than the others, the opponents are never satisfied with the simplest explanation. It's not just about technical jealousy, but about competitive survival, understanding before others where the advantage is and possibly replicating it or banning it. For Mercedes, the Imola weekend did not go as expected after the good feelings of the eve, both from a technical point of view and from the point of view of enthusiasm. Around the Italian debut of Andrea Antonelli, the race returned a disappointing result. The young Bolognese driver was not able to get into Q3 on Saturday, and Sunday ended prematurely due to a technical problem. A problem with the accelerator forced him to park the car on the side of the track, thus ending in the worst possible way a weekend that had a strong symbolic value for him. In any case, even Russell's single-seater never really shone in the race. Looking ahead, Monaco represents a very different and in some ways even more complicated challenge. In fact, for the first time, the rule of the mandatory double stop will be introduced, designed to avoid the classic train that has always characterized the Monaco race. A change that will make the strategy more complex and that takes away from the teams the old certainty of starting in front and staying there. Each stop will have to be managed carefully, also because the undercuts will become a concrete threat. The uneven ground, the very close barriers do not forgive mistakes, so the car must be predictable, responsive, and stable. Not only suspensions, there will also be updates to the steering system. To tackle extreme hairpin bends like the OVS, the slowest in the entire calendar, a new rack has been developed that allows a greater steering angle. A critical precaution, particularly in the first lap of the race when the space to select the trajectory is minimal. At that moment, the drivers need maximum maneuverability to avoid
contacts, despite
the difficulties of Imola. The team is optimistic that these interventions can yield good results in Monaco. It won't be an easy race, but the goal is clear: to be competitive in qualifying and then take advantage of the double stop to stay hooked to the leaders. Antonelli will seek redemption after a bitter debut, while Russell will try to confirm the positive signs from Saturday by improving a race pace that so far has been too inconsistent. If you like the video, hit like, subscribe, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next ones. Write to me. What are your thoughts on this? See you next time.